Hello again folks, and welcome to another Skill Acquisition A-level PE screencast, and this particular screencast is going to be discussing feedback. Feedback involves using the information available to a performer during or after a skill to change the outcome when they try that skill again. It relates to what we call an information systems process, which is the image you see on the screen. So the input, the process, the output, and then afterwards some form of feedback is given in order to change the input or manipulate the input again. It's a bit like what they use in computers, but you're applying it to a performer or a performance of a skill. The main reasons why we use feedback are as follows. First of all, we want to correct any error that's gone wrong. Secondly, we want to adjust or make finer improvements to a particular skill. And that can happen during the skill being performed, so that is also important with regards to feedback. And thirdly, to reinforce learning, so you need to know whether something is correct or not before you do that skill again. And obviously, it will motivate you. If you gain some feedback and you've done something well, it's going to motivate you to want to do it again. So that's why we use feedback in this sense. There are two main forms of feedback, and these are known as intrinsic feedback and extrinsic feedback. Intrinsic feedback meaning feedback from ourselves. We don't need any other source, so it comes from within us, the performer. And extrinsic feedback meaning feedback from someone other than us. And we'll talk about that, or both of these, in the next few slides. So let's deal with intrinsic feedback first. It is direct feedback from our proprioceptors while the skill is being performed. So if you remember when you're talking about associative and cognitive learners and they're starting to develop feels for skills, so things like kinesthesis, which is the feel of a skill, or how once you've thrown a ball, when it leaves your hand, you can usually tell whether you've thrown it correctly or not, or where it's going to be on target or not. That's kinesthesis, and proprioception is the sense of things around you. So for example, if somebody walks quite close to you, behind you, you can sense them without you touching the person. So it's this sense of things around you. And these two things give you a form of intrinsic feedback as you perform skills. It's continuous in nature, so you get it all of the time as you perform the skill. And as I mentioned, you're using those two areas, kinesthesis and proprioception, in order to give your muscles and your brain a continuous feedback loop to adjust the skill as you go. So good examples of intrinsic feedback are anything involving forms of balance, because your brain and your muscles are working together in terms of feedback loops to adjust the movement that you're doing. So it's constant. So if we took something like snowboarding or even skiing, you're constantly adjusting your balance to try and stay on the board or to remain upright and stay in skiing. There are various forms of extrinsic feedback. So remember, extrinsic feedback is feedback from somebody other than you. So intrinsic feedback is from us, extrinsic feedback from others. And these forms of feedback come under four aspects. So the first one is positive feedback. Well, this is fairly straightforward, and I think most people understand what this is naturally. So this is feedback in the form of praise after you've successfully completed a skill. Usually you don't get positive feedback if you've completed the skill incorrectly. So it's important to note that it has to be a successful skill. So for example, a performer may shoot a basketball free throw and the coach may say, yes, that was excellent form, well done for completing that shot into the net. So that's a form of praise, a well done, following the successful nature of that shot. And again, that's a form of extrinsic feedback. The second form of extrinsic feedback is what we call negative feedback. Now, don't get this confused with negative reinforcement or any other ideas associated with negative, because effectively it isn't being negative, is the way to remember it. Negative feedback is feedback in the form of criticism. So you're picking at points that might help the performer to improve that skill in the future. So you're being critical. Obviously, it's extrinsic feedback. So once the skill has been completed, the coach or the observer will give the feedback and identify poor aspects of the performance that can be corrected. So it's not shouting at a performer, it's not telling them off, it's correcting them through helpful critical points. For example, if I was doing a squat at the gym, I might perform my squat and the coach afterwards might say, okay, there were some issues with your squat, your feet weren't correctly planted in the right position, they need to be more shoulder width apart, your hands should be a bit further away from the shoulders as you lean into it, etc, etc. So it's small critical points, that's negative feedback to help improve a performance. The next set of extrinsic feedback is called knowledge of results. In an exam you are permitted to write this as KOR in shorthand, and that's feedback relating to the outcome of a skill movement. So if we have a cricket bowler, for example, bowling at the stumps, once the cricket bowler has bowled the ball, all the coach would then imply was that yes, you hit the wickets, or no, you didn't hit the wickets. After the performance, they wouldn't imply anything about the technique. It is just simply the outcome or the result that is being given as the feedback. And then finally is the reverse of that, the final strand of extrinsic feedback, which is knowledge of performance. And that feedback ignores the result in terms of what's happened to the performance, but the feedback talks about the quality of the technique or the movement action. So again, it's if we have a cricket batter this time, let's focus on a cricket batsman like Ben Stokes. As Ben Stokes would strike the ball, we wouldn't be concerned about giving him information about, yes, that went for 4 runs, or that went for 6 runs, or you missed the ball. That would be knowledge of results. But instead, I would give feedback of, okay, that was excellent. It was a nice wide stance as you drove through the ball, good hand position, head position was very effective as you struck that ball. So I'm giving some feedback relating to the technique or the quality of the movement action. The advantage of knowledge of performance is, although me as a coach is giving it extrinsically, while the performer is also hitting the cricket ball, for example Ben Stokes, he would feel what that stroke felt like. And so knowledge of performance can also be intrinsic as well as extrinsic, because the performer could say, well, actually that felt pretty good, that was a good technical action. And added to that, I might then suggest as the coach that it was a good technical action because of foot placement, hand placement, etc. So they combine. When we're talking about feedback in general, if I want to decide what type of feedback to use, I need to think about the following situations before I use it. The first point is, what is the ability level of the performer that I'm dealing with? Am I dealing with a cognitive learner or autonomous learner? That might affect whether I use negative feedback, for example, or positive feedback. What is the skill that we are focusing on? Is it a gross skill? Is it a fine skill? Is it something complicated? Is it something simple? And that might, again, affect the type of feedback that you use. And we've also got to consider the personality characteristics of the performer themselves. Are they introverted? Are they extroverted? How would they take certain types of feedback? And that's important to make it effective. And if we lastly talk about the effectiveness of feedback, it doesn't matter what type of feedback you give, these things are always ring true. Try to keep to limited information to the performer, keep it simple. Try and give that feedback as quickly as possible after the skill is performed. Try and make it specific to the person you're talking about. What did they do with their hands? What did they do with their head action? So quite specific to them. And where possible, try to work with the intrinsic feedback element. So what did the performer feel like about that throw or that catch or that batting action? And you can discuss that and then add with your extrinsic feedback. Okay, as per usual, thank you very much for watching this short screencast. And if you need more help or support on OCR A-level PE, please head to the ispeakPE channel on YouTube.